An 85-year-old retired officer quietly walked into a bar. 30 minutes later, he and his son showed the whole town what respect really means. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remember respect, honor, and the quiet strength of silent heroes. An old country tune played softly from the jukebox, blending with the clink of glasses and low murmurs inside the bar. At a corner table, 85-year-old retired officer Walter Keller sat alone. He wore a neatly pressed denim shirt, a black cap that read "Veteran," and worn leather boots that had clearly seen years of service. For the past 5 years, every Wednesday like clockwork, he came in at the same time, sat in the same seat, sipped his plain black coffee, and quietly watched the world outside. He used to own the place years ago, but now, nobody really knew who he was anymore. To most, he was just another old man with slow steps and tired eyes. What they didn't see were the silver service stripes etched into his soul. He was once a senior Marine Corps sergeant. That day, just as Walter took a sip of his coffee, the bar's door slammed open. 3 young guys walked in, loud, leather jackets, reeking of beer and motorcycle exhaust. The patches on their coats were flashy, but none of it meant anything real. The biggest of them, broad-shouldered and cocky, scanned the room and locked eyes on Walter. With a smirk, he leaned over to his buddy. "Would you look at that? Grandpa wore heroes here," he sneered. "Still thinks he's somebody, huh?" Walter slowly raised his head. Their eyes met. His were old, sure, but something behind them still burned. He didn't say a word. That silence seemed to make the kid even angrier. "I'm talking to you, old man," the guy growled, stepping up close and towering over him. "You deaf or just dumb?" Walter calmly took another sip of his coffee. Didn't flinch. Didn't speak. That was enough to set the guy off. In one quick motion, the kid slapped the mug from Walter's hand. It hit the floor and shattered. The bar went dead silent. Then came the punch. Sudden, hard, cheap. It hit Walter square in the face and knocked him sideways off his chair. A few folks gasped, but no one moved. Not the bartender. Not the customers. Not even the waitstaff. It was like the whole room froze. Walter slowly pushed himself up. One hand braced on the floor. The other reached into his coat, not for a gun, but for a phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed just one number. "It's me," he said, voice calm. "You need to come." The day was moving like usual at the military base. Inside the briefing room, defense simulations filled the big screen, and young officers were walking through strategy reports. Colonel Eric Keller stood tall, listening without interruption, his eyes sharp and focused. Then, his encrypted phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down. Dad calling. His face froze. Walter never called during working hours. That phone was reserved for one thing only: emergencies. Eric didn't say a word. He simply stood up and walked out. As he headed down the hallway, he answered the call. Something in his walk changed. "Dad," he said. Walter's voice was calm, low and steady. "You need to come. Now." No explanation. No complaint. But Eric understood. Because a Marine doesn't need to explain everything to another Marine. Sometimes, tone is enough. Eric ended the call and gave a silent signal to the base's special operations team. 5 minutes later, a convoy of matte black armored vehicles rolled out the gate. Eric sat in the front passenger seat, quiet. The men inside didn't ask any questions. They didn't have to. Their mission was clear: protect priority target, Senior Staff Sergeant, retired. Back at the bar, Walter was still in his seat. The bruise on his cheekbone was darkening. His eye was starting to swell, but his posture remained firm. The bartender still hadn't said a word. Nobody had. Like some quiet agreement had been made, pretend nothing happened. The punks were still laughing like they owned the place. One of them joked, "Guess he called the nursing home. They'll be wheeling him out any minute." But Walter's hands were calm, folded neatly on the table in front of him. Those hands had seen war, buried brothers, and never bowed to shame. And now they waited with patience, not fear. Outside, the sky grew heavier. Thunder wasn't in the clouds but in the distance. A low mechanical hum began to rise. No one noticed at first. Then it grew louder. Motor rumble. Tires crunching gravel. 3 tactical vehicles pulled up outside the bar. From the first one stepped Colonel Eric Keller. Dressed in camouflage, the unit patch on his shoulder carried weight and pride. The men around him wore civilian clothes, but their bearing gave them away. Discipline in every step. Soldiers in every sense. The moment they entered the bar, the laughter stopped. Even the jukebox seemed to fall silent on its own. All eyes turned to the door, the room filled with something colder than air presence. Eric locked eyes with his father. Walter gave a small nod. No words. No backstory. Didn't need one. Eric turned slightly and asked, "Which one?" Walter barely moved, just lifted a single finger, pointing once. That was enough. The entire room felt it like the air itself dropped 10 degrees. The man he pointed at slouched in his chair, arms crossed. He gave a smug smile. "What's this? You bring your fan club, Colonel? What are you gonna do? Hide behind Daddy?" Eric took one step forward. His voice was low, but firm. "Stand up." The room went dead silent. Time hung still. The punk didn't move. He just kept smirking. "What is this, a court? You cops now or something?" Eric didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his vest and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and hit play. Security footage from the bar. Everyone saw it. Walter, quietly sipping his coffee. The guy approaching. The cup being slapped away. The punch. Walter hitting the floor. All of it. No doubt. No excuses. The room felt like it had been stabbed with ice. Eric looked up slowly. His eyes locked onto the man's. "You attacked a decorated veteran. Unprovoked. In public. This isn't just disrespect. It's a crime." The man's grin disappeared. His eyes darted. "I didn't know. I didn't dash," he stammered. "You didn't care?" Eric cut in. "And now it's too late." Eric's team was already in position. One at the door. One behind the bar. Others in key spots. No weapons drawn, but they didn't need any. Their presence was enough. Not a show of force. A show of control. Just then, 2 police cruisers pulled up outside. Eric's assistant had already forwarded the footage to the sheriff's office. The officers stepped inside, watched the video, then walked over and quietly cuffed the man. He didn't resist. His head dropped. Not in shame, but in defeat. There was no honor in him. Just wait. But Eric wasn't done speaking. The bar was so quiet. Even someone breathing would have echoed. The man in cuffs was being let out, eyes down, and nobody in the room moved. They just sat there, watching. No applause, no nods, just silence. Like every single one of them had been left alone with their own shame. Walter hadn't stood up. His son's hand rested gently on his shoulder, but his eyes were somewhere else, on the country he'd served for years and the silent crowd that had come from it. Eric took a step forward. His voice wasn't just meant to be heard, it was meant to be felt. "You all saw it," he said, his eyes moving across every face in the room. "And none of you stood up. Not a word. Not a sound. My father got knocked to the ground, and in that moment, he was alone. This country exists so men like him never have to be." In the corner, an elderly couple lowered their heads. A young man stared into his empty glass with regret written across his face. No one spoke, because what Eric had said hit harder than any punch. Everyone suddenly realized. This wasn't about a fight. It was a mirror. "I didn't come here to pick a fight," Eric continued, his tone calmer now. "But justice doesn't always start in court. Sometimes it begins right here in a small bar, when the honor of a man drinking his coffee gets thrown to the floor." The bar manager, who had been frozen the whole time, looked down with a haunted expression, questioning everything he thought he knew. "I didn't know what to do," he whispered. Eric walked over. He didn't speak to his face, he spoke to his heart. Doing the right thing isn't complicated. You just stand up. Staying silent is how you help the wrong side win. Walter heard every word. Deep down, pride stirred in him, but his face stayed calm. Because he was from a generation that didn't cheer their victories out loud. He understood the power of silence when it meant something. Outside, more patrol cars had arrived. Officers were inside now, quietly taking witness statements. The incident was on camera. Eric's aide had already contacted the DA, but the real trial had just started, the one in everyone's conscience. Walter slowly stood up. His legs ached, and there was a dull throb in his chest, but he rose like the soldier he once was. When the bartender met his eyes, he instinctively stepped back. "I came to this bar every week," Walter said, "because it used to feel like home. I'd sit, have a coffee, and just watch the world go by. But today, I realized, this place isn't what it used to be." His voice was firm, but weary. "I wore the uniform for 30 years. I've seen war. I've buried my brothers. And I always believed this country would give back the respect we showed it. But today, for the first time, I doubted that." This time, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with guilt, with shame, with something breaking. A man by the jukebox bowed his head and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." The young woman next to him wiped tears from her eyes. Another man lowered his head, took off his glasses, and quietly rubbed at his face. Eric turned to them. His voice was softer now. "You don't owe us an apology, but there's another way to make it right. Next time, be the voice. Don't let something like this happen in silence again. That's how you show true respect to men like my father." Outside, the patrol cars slowly pulled away, and Walter sat down again. This time, he wasn't alone. A young soldier from the back of the room stood up and offered to share his coffee. A group of teens turned to the woman who had filmed everything and said, "Delete that video. We didn't come here to watch it happen. We came to live it." That night, social media exploded with the story of a little bar that had become a giant mirror. As the video spread, the comments poured in. This wasn't just a bar fight. This was a wake-up call. As long as we've got men like Keller, this country will never fall. Silence can be betrayal. Today I learned that. The next morning, someone quietly hung an American flag over the bar's front door. Tucked underneath was a cardboard sign. "Silence won't speak here anymore. Respect will." After that night, nothing in the town looked different. Same sidewalks, same streetlights, same old buildings. But something had shifted in the way people looked at each other. It was like a curtain had lifted just a little. Folks didn't just see each other anymore, they saw the stories behind each face. Mel's Roadhouse opened the next morning right on time, but the bartender didn't move with the same ease as before. As he wiped his hands with a towel, he caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Something from the night before still lingered in his eyes. The table in the corner was empty. Walter hadn't shown up. Some probably thought he wouldn't come anymore. But just before noon, the door creaked open, and that familiar slow, steady walk was heard once again. Walter Keller stepped inside, tilting his hat down gently. The bruising around his eye was fading, but the cut on his forehead still looked fresh. He made his way toward his usual seat. This time, everyone stepped aside without a word. Those who made eye contact gave a small nod. Others just dipped their heads quietly. But Walter hadn't come for respect or recognition. He was just there for his coffee. Before it even arrived, though, 3 people approached his table. One was a local veteran, another from the town council, and the third a young soldier who had watched from afar the day before. "Mr. Keller," the young man said, a bit nervous. "We've been talking. We want to organize a night for all the veterans in town, to honor them, to hear their stories. And if it's okay, we'd like to start with yours." Walter looked up after a pause, his eyes steady. "I don't tell stories," he said, "but I listen to those who do." From that moment, things moved quickly. The town's community club decided to host a Veterans Night at Mel's Roadhouse every first Friday of the month. At first, 3 veterans came, then 10, then 30. A corner of the bar was turned into a display space for old uniforms, medals, photos, memories. In the center, they placed a glass case. Inside it, Walter's old military cap, a pair of worn boots, and the shattered pieces of the coffee cup he dropped after being punched. On a brass plaque next to it, these words were etched: "Respect is lost in silence, but honor can return the same way. SFC Walter Keller, USMC, Ret." The younger crowd started calling that corner the quiet spot. At the end of each night, when the music stopped, everyone stood in silence facing it. No rules, no announcements. Nobody made them do it. But somehow they all just knew. Walter spoke less these days, but people listened more. He got invited to the high school, asked to speak to students about war, about service. When he stood on stage, looking out at 600 young faces, he picked up the mic and said only one sentence: "Some battles aren't won with guns. Sometimes you just need to sit at a table and not back down." The room erupted in applause. That evening, riding home in the car, Eric was behind the wheel. Father and son didn't speak much, but something unspoken passed between them. Not in words, but in shared memories. Eventually, Eric asked quietly, "Dad, did you ever think this would all start with you?" Walter kept his eyes on the window, watching the kids walking beneath the streetlights. "No," he said. "I just came for coffee." But someone forgot what respect looked like. And sometimes, someone has to remind them. Eric smiled. "So, without meaning to, you started something." Walter shook his head. "No, son. I didn't start anything. I just helped people remember who they are." The town was changing. It was still small, but that's where change often begins. Young people weren't just seeing elders as old anymore. And when someone stumbled, there were more hands reaching out instead of eyes looking away. And Mel's Roadhouse. Well, it wasn't just a bar anymore. The wind felt different in town now. Same breeze, same streets, same signs. But something had shifted in people's eyes. That invisible curtain lifted. Shopkeepers swept their doorsteps in the morning and greeted passing elders with a gentle, "Good morning, Mr. Walter." The elderly, once seen as shadows in the background, had become the keepers of memory. And all of it, everything had started with a quiet act of resistance. Over a single cup of coffee. That morning, Walter Keller showed up a little earlier than usual at Mel's Roadhouse. A small blackboard by the door read, "Tonight, 18th Veterans Gathering, 8 p.m." The place was still empty. The bartender, spotting Walter, stood up a little straighter. No one asked how he wanted his coffee anymore. It was always there plain, hot, waiting for him at his table. But today, Walter didn't go straight to his coffee. Instead, he walked toward the glass display case on the wall. The broken coffee cup shards were still inside. Alongside it, a single button from his old uniform, an aged unit insignia, and the brass plaque. "Respect is lost in silence, but honor can return the same way." Walter placed his hand on the glass. It was cold like the trench walls he once leaned against during long nights in war. His eyes didn't tear up, but something in him stirred. Because the items behind that glass weren't just keepsakes. They carried weight. Being remembered was a gift, but memory didn't always bring peace. Just then, Eric walked in. Uniform crisp, stride sharp, but as he approached his father, there was something softer in his expression, some hesitation. "You look tired, Dad," he said quietly. Walter didn't take his eyes off the display. "I had a dream last night, one I hadn't had in years." Eric lowered his head. His father rarely spoke about the war. Dreams even less. Walter took a breath. "Vietnam. One night, there was thick fog. 3 of our boys had wandered off course. When they didn't check in, I went after them. One was shot, the other 2 were panicking. We were under fire, but I carried them, dragged them, 400 meters, clenching my jaw the whole way. On the way back, I took a round to the shoulder. Didn't fall. Couldn't fall, not with lives behind me. The wound healed, but making that decision, alone, never really did." Eric stayed silent. Sometimes words just got in the way. But after a moment, he looked his father in the eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell me that?" Walter finally turned to face him. "Because heroism isn't something you talk about. It's something you carry." Those words sank into Eric like a stone. He was a leader now too, giving orders, carrying weight. And for the first time, he truly understood. The silence his father lived with was heavier than any metal. That night, the bar filled to the brim. Not just veterans. Young people, students, farmers, doctors. Everyone came. One by one, people stepped up to the mic and shared their stories. But none hit harder than a 22-year-old soldier who said, "I came here tonight to honor Mr. Keller. But I've realized, honoring him isn't enough. We have to live like him. Speak up. Do what's right. Lend a hand when someone falls. I'm not just a soldier anymore tonight. I promise to be a witness." While the crowd erupted in applause, Walter didn't sit down. He stood with his hands folded behind his back, just watching. He wasn't looking at a crowd, he was watching a shift. Later that night, long after everyone had left, the bar closed its doors. Only 2 men remained, Walter and Eric. They pulled 2 chairs outside and sat in silence. The sky above them was filled with stars. A soft wind rattled the old wind chime. Distant echoes whispered through the stones. Eric reached into his pocket, pulled out something small and aged. "This is for you," he said. "Last month, the Department of Defense reviewed your file. The courage you showed that night in Vietnam. They've decided to officially recognize it. But I know, to you, it's just a piece of metal." Walter looked down at the metal. He took it in his hand, said nothing for a long while. Then, finally, he nodded. "You're right. It's just a metal. But that broken coffee cup in the case, that's the thing worth remembering." Eric smiled. "And that's exactly why we'll never forget it." That night, after the lights went out, someone stood quietly by the display case. A young girl, waiting for her father. Her eyes paused on the words behind the glass. She pulled out her phone but didn't turn on the camera light. She just stared, then whispered, "My grandpa was in the war too." But no one ever asked about his story. The next day, the town's local paper ran a headline across the front page. "One man's quiet stand woke a town's conscience." As the months passed, Nothing in town looked the same, but no one could quite say when the change had begun. Maybe it started the day Walter Keller walked into that bar. Or maybe it was when a coffee cup hit the floor and something cracked open, something no one had dared to name before. Everyone had their own answer. But one truth stood unshaken. No one stayed silent anymore. Mel's Roadhouse was no longer just a bar. It had become a place of memory. The monthly Veterans Night began drawing visitors from outside the town. Young people no longer saw the elderly as quiet shadows sitting in corners. Every wrinkle, every pause, was a closed cover hiding an untold story. The high school principal made a suggestion to the mayor. Walter Keller should speak at this year's memorial ceremony. There was hesitation. Could an old man really handle the stage, the crowd? But when Walter quietly agreed, no one questioned it again. When the day came, the town square was packed. Thousands stood holding small flags, eyes full of expectation. There were local leaders, military officers, students, veterans. But everyone was waiting for just one man, Walter Keller. He walked onto the stage slowly, no cane. The faint mark from an old wound still visible on his forehead. When he reached the mic, no one dared breathe. The crowd wasn't just watching, they were witnessing. His speech lasted only 3 sentences. I fought for this country. But the real fight begins in peace. If we stop seeing each other, we lose respect. There was no applause, just silence. But this silence wasn't shame. It was honor. Because sometimes, silence means a whole town is listening without looking away. After that day, Walter Keller slowly faded from the spotlight. He stopped coming to the bar as often. People greeted him in the street, but they also gave him space. He had become a symbol, and symbols don't live in crowds. They live in memory. One morning, when the bar opened, something new had been placed inside the glass case. No one knew who left it, but there it was, a small envelope. On the outside, a handwritten note read, "Over time, I realized you don't have to grow old to learn respect. Someone who once stayed silent." Asterisk, a new board was hung in the corner of the bar. On it were Walter's 3 sentences. Soon, local children began pinning little notes beneath it. Some read, "Grandpa, I want to be like you. If I see someone fall, I'll be the first to run over. My dad looks up to you and now I do too." Eric Keller had earned a new rank by then. But whenever he returned to the base, one thing always sat on his desk: a torn patch from his father's first uniform and a coffee mug, cracked, but still standing. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eric was walking in front of the bar with his kids. His daughter ran ahead, pressing her hands to the glass case. She pointed to the broken mug. "Dad," she asked, "why is that cup so important?" Eric smiled. Kneeling to her level, he said, "Because it didn't just hold coffee. It held respect. It spilled, but it never broke." That summer morning, Walter Keller sat on the porch of his old house at the edge of town, a warm cup of coffee in hand, his gaze on the horizon. A man walking by saw him, stopped, removed his hat, placed his hand over his heart, and bowed his head. Walter nodded back, not a word spoken, none needed, because by then, everyone knew the true strength of a community isn't found in loud applause. It's in the quiet salute. And that day, Walter Keller left behind the loudest message of all, buried in silence. Honor is sometimes just one quiet step away. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We remember respect, honor, and the quiet strength of silent heroes.